My name's Keegan, everybody. I'm pretty sure I know most of you on the webinar today. I've also got Bjorn from Acronis here with us. He'll be taking a bulk of the presentation from me as I get through some intros. So today's webinar, designing your custom disaster recovery roadmap. We're really trying to simplify stuff, and we're excited to share the content that we've got for you today. Our agenda, we're going to do some quick introductions. We're going to run through a little bit of setup information, some stuff that we think is important to share, specifically with the small businesses really trying to get into this for the first time, trying to understand that. The 6 steps to building a DR plan. Ideally here we'll have a couple minutes for some Q&A. We'll quick cover some of the supplemental resources that are going to be sent out as part of the webinar, and then we'll close out at the end. Couple pieces to mention. We do have marketing overseeing the Q&A chat, so feel free to drop questions in there, or as we get to the Q&A session, we'll have some time to open that up. But feel free to get questions out there. Goal is hopefully to have a little bit more of a conversation today rather than just everything of Ontech presenting to you. And I'm going to get that out of the corner so you guys don't have to see it. So an opening quote that we think is good to share by Benjamin Franklin: "By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail." And this is becoming more and more important as cybersecurity evolves, as recovery efforts change, mobility has changed. COVID's kind of accelerated a lot of that. And so really that's one of the good first steps here is to really understand what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to just prepare better. Introductions, everybody knows from a customer standpoint at Ontech, if you're a prospective customer or just consuming some content from us for the first time. At Ontech, we value education and simplicity. Our goal today is to really simplify that creation of a DR process and provide some good supplemental resources. And then ideally, we'd love to partner with you guys to deliver a platform. Acronis is a leader in the space. A lot of people don't know their name, unfortunately, but they provide some best-in-class solutions, specifically with disaster recovery as a service. And Bjorn joins us today to highlight the journey to building the DR plan. And we'll have him introduce himself a little bit when we get to his slides here in just a second. One other housekeeping item, I did see a couple people message me. Yes, the deck will be part of the roll-up that gets sent out after. So don't feel like you got to take screenshots in here. The deck is going to be inclusive in the roll-up that gets sent out. So with that, I wanted to kind of turn this over a little bit more to our partner here to present, and Bjorn, take it away.
Sure, thanks Keegan. So my name is Bjorn Jujal. I'm one of the solution advisors here at Acronis. I've been here for about over 10 years, but I have about over 25 years of experience in this particular industry of data protection, disaster recovery, also quite a bit of experience in the storage and virtualization space. It's kind of my background, but I help customers establish disaster recovery solutions for their infrastructure for critical workloads. And so I'll be kind of going through a little bit of a thought process around how the planning process for disaster recovery. A lot of folks, kind of, I guess, interchange the ideas of backup and disaster recovery. And from our perspective, these are two sort of separate or distinct ideas. Most folks have a backup recovery solution, and backup is really just the idea of having another secondary copy so that you have a safeguard in case the primary copy is lost. And there's generally some best practices around backup recovery. The 3-2-1 is the most commonly known, and having 3 copies of your data, 2 media, 1 offsite. Beyond that, though, the focus of this conversation is really disaster recovery. So disaster recovery takes that one step further in terms of your overall data protection strategy And it's combining not only that offsite copy that you can restore from, but also adding that infrastructure in place so that you can very quickly resume your infrastructure in the event of a small or large disaster. So that's kind of the differentiation here. The next slide. So just to kind of outline that further, for the most part, when we're talking about backup and disaster recovery, it's really the key things there to consider are really around how much downtime and data loss is acceptable to an organization. And depending upon the answers to those two really critical questions, you can determine whether backup or both backup and disaster recovery are needed. I've been in the disaster recovery space for a long time, and I think one of the things that always sort of made customers not fully deploy disaster recovery was that it was often something that really was targeted toward large enterprise where there's a lot more resources. But today, disaster recovery is available to all customers. So I always advocate for having both a backup and disaster recovery strategy. Their functions are different. The backup is more around preventing data loss. It's about quick recovery. It's all-encompassing, covering all of the devices, and having just that copy of the data to recover from, usually from an inexpensive media. Disaster recovery is all about that criticality of that workload and being able to resume it very quickly, typically from a more hot storage. It's about higher performance, having that sort of standby compute and resuming in a very quick period of time, usually less than 15 minutes, or different people have different recovery time objectives, but just getting those workloads very quickly so that you can have a minimization of the downtime related to that event. Next slide. So I'll just kind of be talking through the 6 steps of IT disaster recovery. The first step is asset inventory, and you can kind of build this out, Keegan. Just risk analysis, then business impact analysis, downtime cost analysis, and then finally, once you go through that process, just establishing an appropriate disaster recovery solution for you, and then performing the testing. So I'll just kind of walk through each of these steps. The first step being asset inventory. So in terms of asset inventory, it's important to first of all understand what assets you have in the environment. And Acronis has some tools for that, both sort of manual collection tools, or kind of using some scripting tools that we have. But there's also built-in software and hardware inventory in our product itself as well. So once you have it in place, or either through a trial, for example, it's very easy to get a good understanding of all the hardware and software assets. The hardware inventory provides a good way to figure out your make, model, serial number, all the specs for all your devices, and the software inventory is the complement to that, where it provides you all of the software assets that are on those specific devices, the versions, the location, the license type, and so on and so forth. So just getting that asset inventory. And then in broader, I mean, we're talking today about an IT disaster recovery planning strategy. Of course, on the broader business continuity planning, the asset inventory will be larger, but this is going to be around IT disaster recovery. So again, just getting the asset inventory in place, and that leads to the sort of the next step, which is really the risk assessment. And risk assessment is all about evaluating how threats and vulnerabilities interact with those assets to create risk. And the goal of disaster recovery planning is about risk mitigation, right? So just reducing the amount of risk that the organization is going to be taking. In terms of threats, a lot of folks will think about disaster recovery as something, well, I don't know if I really need that. We're not in a disaster prone area, or we're not going to be affected by hurricanes or tornadoes. But the reality is that most of the threats that occur, that's the natural catastrophes are just 6% of the types of threats. Most of the time, we see power outages, hardware failures, software issues. So these threats and vulnerabilities, having a disaster recovery plan in place can address these other types of more common situations that arise. On the vulnerability side, it'd be software updates and sometimes human error. Ransomware attacks are on the rise. That's sort of the number one thing that a lot of organizations are trying to protect from, is having a very solid disaster recovery plan in place, because usually these days ransomware attacks are happening every 11 seconds. And usually ransomware will go after backup software in a customer's environment to try to cripple a customer from recovering in the first place. And so not only having that backup plan in place, but in the event of a ransomware attack, you would be able to spin up your servers from any point in time and be back up and running. And it just, again, provides that sort of another layer of protection against a ransomware attack as well. Once the risk assessment is done, we kind of go to the next step, which is we have some tools here again to categorize the risk. Sorry. So when you are looking through the risk, it's good to kind of quantify all of that and put it into a disaster recovery planning document. So it's going to look at your potential risks. You just outline those, who the stakeholders are, what the existing controls are, what the gaps are, and then categorizing that risk and your tolerance to that risk. So sometimes there's risks, but sometimes, it's also a little bit about what's the right way to balance the cost of establishing a solution and all that's involved with the risk that's involved. And there's some risk that you will say we are willing to tolerate the risk and we'll take this level of data protection steps, and some where you may say, well, it's not really acceptable. And this goes back to a little bit of understanding the risks. So this is that part of that process is just kind of, again, listing out all those risks, understanding the category, the tolerance, what steps are needed. Maybe it's something that's quickly and easily fixable. Maybe it's something that's more substantial, but ultimately somebody has to take ownership of that as well. So just assigning it, understanding that risk and assigning it to somebody to resolve in the organization. Maybe it's the IT person, you're just one or two IT folks in the organization, so it's all on your shoulders. But a lot of times this disaster recovery planning does involve the executives as well. So sometimes it could be your executive staff that needs to kind of be involved in that thought process around risk as well. But again, once that risk assessment is complete, we'll go to the next step, which is the business impact analysis. And the terms that are important to understand in terms of business impact analysis are really these three terms, and they're frequently used in the disaster recovery space: RPO, RTO, and MTD. So again, recovery point objectives is really just about knowing, how much data loss is acceptable to your organization. Recovery time is objective is just how much downtime is acceptable. So those two figures, just understanding how much downtime, how much data loss, and is acceptable to the business, puts you in a good spot to determine, what kind of data protection strategy you want to put in place, and what kind of disaster recovery SLAs you want to establish internally. So the business impact analysis, again, it's really looking at your business processes. So if it's payroll or customer support, or invoicing customers, whatever it is that the business's processes exist in your organization, maybe it's manufacturing process, there's internal resources that are supporting those processes. It's not only the people, but also the IT infrastructure that's typically supporting it. So maybe in the case of order processing, it's your ERP servers and then all the financial folks that are involved in that process. And so but looking at the specific resources, we want to try to minimize downtime for those resources because they can have an impact. So this is just taking that RPO, RTO, MTB, and mapping them to the different business processes. And there'll be different MTDs, RPOs, RPOs, and RTOs for specific workloads, depending upon the process. And you may go through this sort of process of understanding those business processes and categorizing them. In case of order processing, maybe it's really critical because now you can't accept payments or you can't invoice customers if a critical system goes down related to that, and that has an immediate impact on the business, such as lost revenue. And more generally speaking, any DR event will have a general negative impact, whether it's lost productivity or brand reputation or any number of or supply chain impact to your vendors. It could have any number of impacts. So just kind of going through this business impact analysis will give you a lot of insight into into that impact. So then you can go and think about how to address it, which again, if we go to the next step, which is the downtime cost analysis. So again, downtime cost analysis is really important in terms of your internal thought process around establishing a disaster recovery solution and getting buy-in from all of the different folks in the organization. If you can go back one slide, please.
Sorry, yeah, my computer's not liking me at the second. Trying to get back to that one.
Okay. So in terms of downtime cost analysis, there's some specs, there's some stats here on the slide that you can look at, but the average downtime cost is $8,600 an hour in downtime costs. You can certainly use the industry average when you're looking at downtime cost, doing the downtime cost analysis. But to make it more specific to your business, what I often recommend, especially because there's a lot of factors that will go into this downtime cost analysis very often. Sometimes it's hard to quantify, but uh, to do a kind of quick and dirty exercise, it's pretty easy to just take the total revenue divided by the total working hours, which is 2,080 hours, and that gives you a downtime cost that's kind of more specific to your business. Once you have that downtime cost, especially if you're an IT person, it's important to kind of sit down with and have an internal discussion around recovery point, recovery time objective, and downtime costs with your executives. It's a team decision. If you're the IT person and you haven't had this discussion with your executives, then it leaves a kind of an opening of risk in terms of your role, because as we all know, some things happen. Eventually, will happen. A server could go down, or some kind of systems will go down. There's IT situations. That's why we're all here to help with those kinds of situations, right? But if there's a server that goes down and the expectation from the executive team is that, oh, well, why isn't that server up and running here? It's been down for an hour or 2 hours or 4 hours or whatever it may be. And then there's a lot of pressure on the IT team at that point in time to get that workload up and running, right? So just setting expectations internally across the entire executive team and having an internal SLA um, is really important. So this downtime cost analysis is part of that discussion. So if you're an IT person, and I always encourage IT, I used to do these DR webinars or seminars in one of my previous roles, and I'd have a room full of CIOs, and I'd ask, an IT directors, and I'd ask, the question of like, well, if you were to experience a downtime event, um, how much time do you think your CEO would want that system to be up and running? Within what period of time, right? And inevitably, they would all say, well, right away, right? But that's not the reality of IT and managing IT systems. So sometimes there's a gap or between the expectation and the reality, and this is a process of understanding and setting those expectations. Now, in the case of when you have that discussion with a CIO or CEO of the organization or the CFO and say, this is our SLA, they may say, well, that's not really acceptable. We want to be up and running within 2 hours or 4 hours or whatever is appropriate for the business. And if the current approach doesn't meet that goal, then that's an opportunity to have a discussion around establishing a disaster recovery strategy. Or on the flip side, you may go through that risk analysis and say, this is the risk that we have, and we can recover within 24 hours or 48 hours, because we need to get new hardware in place, and then the restore is going to take X amount of time to recover X terabytes of data. And maybe that's acceptable to the organization, but at least you've had that discussion so that there's a common expectation all the way around, both from the IT perspective as well as the executives, and it alleviates the pressure in that critical situation, which eventually will arise, of systems going down, and then there's no scrambling because there's a collective understanding. But this downtime cost analysis, again, will prompt either of those two types of discussions. One is, hey, we want to kind of minimize our downtime, and we're willing to fund that by establishing a disaster recovery solution, or no, our disaster recovery solution, our current approach around data protection with backup recovery is sufficient. We're okay with, let's say, a day or two of downtime, and we're okay with the risk. If it takes you that long to recover, no problem. So this downtime cost analysis, spent a lot of time on it, but it is important as part of the discussion. I always encourage customers and IT folks to kind of, again, quantify this, try to quantify it, and there's some simple ways to do that and have that internal discussion. Next slide, please. Once you go through these steps, then you can go ahead and decide on a disaster recovery strategy that is appropriate for your organization. Traditionally, as I mentioned, disaster recovery is something that was sort of reserved for the large enterprise. It often involved a duplicate data, a secondary site that was duplicate hardware. It had high capital expenditure, high operational expenditure. It often required a dedicated disaster recovery strategy, a staff, a lot of resources and different technology stack, whether it's storage or servers, networking, and then various replication tools across the board, whether it's SAN-based replication or backup recovery solutions or host native replication, any combination of these things might be part of that strategy. So there's a lot of involved process there for a large enterprise. And so because of that approach of duplicate data center with duplicate hardware or just using replication technology or SAN-based replication and things like that, it would often be something that would be only some affordable by a large organization. With disaster recovery as a service, it democratizes disaster recovery. It makes it available to any business, small or medium businesses, or it's easy because there's little to no entry cost in terms of high infrastructure costs. It's easy to deploy and manage and test. It consolidates backup in DR. It's scalable, elastic, and you can perform on-demand testing and failover within minutes. It's just leveraging the modernization of technologies with virtualization in the cloud to be able to deliver direct disaster recovery as a service and make it very cost effective. So today, I would say, every organization should have both backup and disaster recovery. And from an IT administrator or IT manager perspective, it's all about removing the pressure of a downtime event from their shoulders and not having to scramble at that moment, because you can now fail over and be back up and running within minutes for that critical workload at a very affordable cost, and go back to your day-to-day operations, and then at your discretion, when it's appropriate for you and the business, be able to perform that failback. Maybe it takes a week or 2 weeks, or either days or weeks, to get that new hardware in place and then do the failback. And so it just eliminates all that pressure from an IT perspective, because your server's up and running, the business is operating, and then you can go on to plan the failback process at an appropriate time. So next slide. So once you establish that disaster recovery plan, it's important to do the testing. So that's sort of the final step in the DR planning process, is to test, learn what learn through that process. So you're going to perform testing, and you update your DR test, and then do it again. So traditionally, at least for the large enterprise, you would find DR tests typically every 6 months or every year. Today, at least with our solution, you can do DR testing on demand anytime you want, or it can be automated, and we just spin up the servers, take screenshots, and you can see how the DR test ran. So it really minimizes the amount of effort on the IT person in terms of actually doing DR testing. And the failover itself is also all automated in terms of being able to orchestrate that recovery with the click of a button. You're able to spin those servers up from anywhere. And so this testing process is extremely important, though. So I'll give you an example. I was at the Disaster Recovery Journal Conference a year ago, and one of the disaster recovery planners got up and told a story about how they did their disaster recovery test. And during that test, they did the restoration of their server that ended up reintroducing malware into the environment. So that became something that they had to, plan for, and they integrated their cybersecurity team with their disaster recovery planning team to account for that scenario. In our case, with our platform, we have Acronis Cyber Protect Cloud. It's the combination of both cybersecurity and data protection. So we have technology that eliminates that scenario. But in their case, they didn't have that. So they had to do planning and have a cybersecurity incident response plan, incorporated into their disaster recovery planning. But that came out through the DR testing process. So, things like that come out through the DR testing process as you do your testing, and so that you can plan for it and improve. And then, going into any disaster situation, you've already done the testing. In our case, it's just a click of a button testing, so you can automatically spin up the servers and shut them down. So once you've done that DR test, going into that disaster situation that you can fail over without any kind of question. You know exactly what's going to happen. There's DR orchestration capabilities built in, so you can account for the interdependencies between different workloads. You want to make sure, let's say your database servers come up before your application servers. You might have such interdependencies amongst the different server workloads that you have. And so you can kind of account for all of that through the DR testing and DR orchestration capabilities that are built in as well. But so through this iterative process, you're able to kind of learn and discover, evaluate, assess where you're at, improve, and then do the testing again until you're sure that you are going to be able to know exactly what's going to occur during that actual failover situation. Next slide. So with that, I guess we can open it up to Q&A or any comments. So I'll hand it back to Keegan.
Thank you. Thanks for the info. We appreciate that. And it's funny that we're talking about DR, and I'm about to have a hardware failure on my computer as we're trying to do the presentation. Taking a look here at Q&A. I don't see anything in there. Well, I guess I'll keep bouncing through to kind of close out our presentation, and then I'll keep an eye on the Q&A section. So in the Teams box, if you do have a question, there's a little Q&A tab. Just go ahead, drop that out there. I'm more than happy to start a discussion on that. So I know a lot of good info was presented there. And that's always been one of the big struggles, is where to start, where do we go from here? And that's one of the things that we wanted to put out to the group. So if you're struggling on where to start, we've got an approach of a workshop where we'll come in and meet with basically business ownership, executive, all the way through IT, and kind of talk through that plan that we just went through and really start from the ground up. Another option that we've put together is what we call a run book, and it's really just a streamlined approach just to get version 1 done. We're essentially trying to sprint to get to step 6 to start to test and then use tabletop and simulation to learn from and improve on. And then the other way is obviously just solutions in general. We've got the whole stack of Acronis capable to offer here through Ontech. They've been a terrific partner of ours. I know there's a couple folks that are on that have done some of the DR simulations through their platform. And I think a lot of them would speak on the simplicity, the ease of the platform. A timeline, just to kind of see how we go about an engagement. If we looked at a workshop, we'd come in here this month in October, and we'd spend probably at least a day, depending on the organization, might be a day and a half to 2 days. But we'd spend our time to go through a lot of what we talked about in both inventorying, business impact analysis, risk analysis. We're going to go through all of that. We'd come back in November and kind of review all that compiled data. One of the things that was mentioned a lot is making sure IT and executives, ownership are on the same page. So it's here's what we compiled, here's what we did, are we in agreement? We then look to start to implement a new DR strategy or technology if applicable. And then we start to get into that sequence of testing. Run that first simulation, complete a tabletop exercise, and then really start to get an actual first iteration of the plan. Some supplemental resources for today that are going to get sent out. So we'll have an asset collection template, the risk assessment as the business impact template. So those will all be Excel sheets that will be provided. The business disaster recovery template document is contained within that roll-up. We will have today's presentation in there too. That did get asked, so yes, that will be in there. And then the ebook, Acronis has another great resource in that ebook titled "A Beginner's Guide to Disaster." I see Razi did ask, is the recording going to be available? Yes, I believe marketing did record the webinar today, and we will send that out. The ebook, that Beginner's Guide too, would be another good supplemental resource of, let's say you've got to go talk with an owner. You're on the IT side and you've got to talk with an executive or an owner. That ebook has a lot of good introductory data. It's not there's not the RTO, RPO, all the different acronyms that exist within that. So it's a good simple way to try to begin that bridge conversation.
Again, we do have a question. How is Acronis different from Datto?
Great question. Can you guys hear me okay? Because I see that I am muted or frozen on the screen.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, I can take that question, I guess. So in relation to how Acronis is different from Datto, Acronis is a data protection and cybersecurity company. So we have a suite of technology. It's called Acronis Cyber Protect Cloud, and it integrates. It's all managed from one console with one agent. So it includes not only the data protection side, but the cybersecurity. So we do backup, disaster recovery, email security, endpoint security, endpoint detection response, data loss prevention, and endpoint management. So that's patch management, remote desktop, and it's all managed from one console with one agent. And so we customers get the benefit of really consolidating these different aspects. But beyond that, we integrate the data protection features with our cybersecurity and management features in a way that closes many of the protection gaps. We take a lot of our cybersecurity expertise and apply it into our data protection aspects of our platform as well. So it elevates the protection approaches versus traditional just pure play data protection products. We have we come from the data protection space. That's what we've been doing the longest time. But we apply a lot of the cybersecurity expertise. But so there's various ways that we integrate these, and when you use them in conjunction with each other. For example, when you're doing a recovery, we'll automatically do the malware scans as part of the recovery process. So we'll do the malware scans when the backup reaches our cloud with our malware technology, right? So it provides some strong defense. We have self-protection features built in that make our processes and executables unalterable by ransomware, which often will go after backup software. There's various integrations between our backup software and our patch management, where we're doing, for example, patching. We'll do a pre-update backup in advance of a patch being deployed. So it's this sort of intersection, and then kind of peppered through the whole solution are these sort of intersections where we add greater value to a customer that leverages both of them. That being said, if there's only interest in our backup and DR solution, then the differences between us and a kind of solution like Datto, it's similar in many ways. It's we can do both file snapshot based backups as well as file level backups for servers as it relates to disaster recovery. And we back up to the Acronis cloud, which is based in Phoenix, Arizona. There's no appliance requirement in our solution, yet we can use any local disk target as the target. So we don't lock anybody into a multi-year contract or anything like that from an appliance perspective. We don't You're not required to get an appliance even. We have customers that will back up, let's say, direct to the cloud if they want to, and then spin up servers in the cloud. But you can do both local backup, local spin up. We have local activation with screenshot verification, as well as the same thing in the cloud, local cloud-based activation with screenshot verification. So in many ways, it's quite similar. There's DR orchestration capability, automated testing capability. So across the board, it's quite similar in many regards. But our overarching value proposition is that we can provide and have our platform become a foundation for much more than just the one use case of backup recovery. And you can, I've seen it again and again with customers where a lot of customers are overwhelmed with the amount of tasks. There's usually small one or two person IT teams. Often you have to wear all the hats, and we bring a level of operational efficiency to the environment in terms of managing everything, consolidating it down, and then elevate the overall protection by integrating these different aspects to bring new features to the table that you just wouldn't have if you're using disparate solutions. So that's kind of some of the overarching value proposition that we bring to the table there, and some of the differences between us and a product like Datto.
Way better delivery than I could have ever given to differentiate those two. But yeah, I would reinforce it's the platform that Acronis brings. Datto is just that data backup disaster recovery vendor. Acronis brings substantially more to the table in terms of their solution set. Sorry about the little hiccup there. Like I mentioned, hardware failures happen, and yeah, my computer just decided to die as we tried to close out the webinar. So really, the only other slide I had for you guys was just kind of a summary piece, which we'll kind of just skip over because we talked about here. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A that I can see. So I'll hang out here for another minute or two, but we appreciate everybody taking the time with us this morning to talk. We'll have somebody from Ontech be in touch with you as we start to chart your disaster recovery plan. Appreciate it, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.